Good afternoon and welcome to this edition of the St. Mark Spark. It is Friday, May the 1st, a new month, a new day in our life. We've been talking this week about the book of Colossians and the letter that Paul wrote to the church at Colossae. And we're going to continue on that same vein today. And I'm going to read in Colossians chapter 2, verses 8 through 23. This is the Message version. Hear the word of the Lord. Watch out for people who try to dazzle you with big words and intellectual double talk. They want to drag you off into endless arguments that never amount to anything. They spread their ideas through the empty traditions of human beings and the empty superstitions of spiritual beings. But that is not the way of Christ. Everything of God gets expressed in Him so you can see and hear Him clearly. You don't need a telescope or a microscope or a horoscope to realize the fullness of Christ and the emptiness of the universe without Him. When you come to Him, that fullness comes together for you too. His power extends over everything. Entering into this fullness is not something you figure out or achieve. It's not a matter of being circumcised or keeping a long list of laws. No, you are already insiders, not through some secretive initiative, right, but rather through what Christ has already gone through for you, destroying the power of sin. If it's an initiation ritual that you're after, you've already been through it by submitting to baptism. Going under the water was a burial of your old life. Coming up out of it was a resurrection, God raising you from the dead as He did Christ. When you were struck in your old sin-dead life, you were incapable of responding to God. God brought you alive, right along with Christ. Think of it. All sins forgiven, the slate wiped clean, that old arrest warrant canceled and nailed to Christ's cross. He stripped all the spiritual tyrants in the universe of their sham authority at the cross and marched them naked through the streets. So don't put up with anyone pressuring you in details of diet, worship services, or holy days. All those things are mere shadows cast before what was to come. The substance is Christ. Don't tolerate people who try to run your life, ordering you to bow and scrape, insisting that you join their obsession with angels and that you seek out visions. They're a lot of hot air. That's all they are. They're completely out of touch with the source of life, Christ, who puts us together in one piece, whose very breath and blood flow through us. He is the head, and we are the body. We can grow up healthy in God only as He nourishes us. So then if with Christ you've put all that pretentious and infantile religion behind you, why do you let yourselves be bullied by it? Don't touch this, don't taste that, don't go near this. Do you think things that are here today and gone tomorrow are worth that kind of attention? Such things sound impressive if said in a deep voice. They even get the illusion of being pious and humble and ascetic. But they're just another way of showing off, making yourselves look important. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. In this new world, in the shelter-in-place world, I've been spending a lot more time at home. I'm a very active person, and so this is something that is, it's not easy for me. But as I sit and I think about things in general, I've been becoming a bit nostalgic. And there are some things around me in my office and at home that I sort of look at, and it reminds me of former times, former places, people that I know, activities that I have done, places that I visited. One of them is this bag that I bought a few years ago in Nicaragua. It reminds me of all the people that I know in Esteli, Nicaragua. It reminds me of the traveling companions, my teammates, the experiences that I had, the spiritual growth that I had experienced on these mission trips. Another nostalgic thing are these two guys right here. Now, this is the Dalai Lama, and there's a story behind the Dalai Lama's name. It was given to me by a spiritual group called Koinonia a couple years ago. And then my friend, the big bunny Peep, that my sister-in-law and my eldest niece gave me a couple years ago. So these are things that I hold in my heart, and they bring fond memories. But I've also been watching some TV shows, and one of those TV shows is The Andy Griffith Show. And I remember watching this show as a kid, and I identified with many of the things that the child, Opie Taylor, went through, and those family situations, situations in school, and situations with friends and family. But there are a few things that stuck out to me, and not in a good way, about that show. One of those things is the way that they depicted the minorities. And in this case, it was the mountain people, the people who lived up in the mountains and in the hills. And they depicted them as backward. And the family that was showcased oftentimes was the Darling family. And Andy Taylor, in one episode, is being chased by the daughter Charlene, and her daddy, Charlene's daddy, works out a way to get her back to her husband, who she is somehow seemingly divorced, by burying something in the ground. And the daddy reminds his daughter Charlene that her current husband isn't so bad. He treats her well and doesn't beat her so much. The way that women were depicted in those shows back then too were something that stood out to me. The point of this is that oftentimes those things which we hold near and dear, those old nostalgic things, have been glossed over in our eyes as being something more than they were, or just as they were, but we have forgotten, or we have changed, or we have moved on to something different as time has gone by. And I wonder, as I was reading through this this passage in Colossians, as Paul is speaking to the church in Colossae, that the folks there, the folks that he was speaking to, had somehow not been able to move beyond their old nostalgic ways. They were holding on to the law. They were holding on to circumcision. They were holding on to things that Christ had come to give them a new way of thinking about, a new way of looking at their salvation, a new way of marching forward. But they were holding on to circumcision. They were holding on to the law. They were holding on to rites and rituals in ways that were not bringing glory to God. And they were also shackling them. They were holding, the disciples were being held back by their nostalgia, by their hanging on to these old things. And what I was then thinking about was, as we move forward into this new age of church, this new way of doing church, and this, through this reset time of not having in-person worship, if it's also a time for us to look at some of our nostalgia and think about what we are holding on to, why we hold on to it, and maybe re-examining how we move forward as we start to re-enter, whenever that may take place. Moses and Aaron, back in the Old Testament, you'll remember the story about Moses going up the mountain and speaking with God and getting the commandments. And when he comes back down, he discovers that Aaron and the people had made these golden calves. They had made their sacred cows. And so you may be familiar with that term, a sacred cow. And some of these things in our church, the way that we do church, have become sacred cows. And we hold on to them looking backward. The past is good. Those things that are nostalgic, our experiences can teach us. They can teach us what things have worked, what things are good. They can also teach us what things did not work, what things are not good, what things once worked but may not work now or in the future. So as we end our time today together, might we think about those things that we are holding on to that are keeping us from realizing the future that God has in store for us. Peace be with you, and I'll see you soon.